Did you know medieval people often slept in two shifts, waking in the middle of the night to pray, talk, or simply dream again? Or that bread wasn't just eaten, but used as a plate for stews and meats? And in some courts, animals like pigs or goats could be put on trial, judged just like humans. Tonight, we'll explore 10 forgotten facts of the Middle Ages, curious, strange, and wonderfully human. So settle in, let your mind drift, and let history carry you gently towards sleep. Welcome back, sleepyheads, and welcome to Dreaming Through Ages. Before we begin tonight's medieval journey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there as you press play? Let me know down in the comments. I always find it magical to see how many corners of the world we're drifting through together. Tonight, we'll explore 10 of the most curious facts of medieval history. Not as a lecture, but as a gentle path into sleep, where each fact becomes a story, told slowly, wrapped in the quiet rhythms of a world long past. Perhaps you'll hear the echo of footsteps on castle stone, or the rustle of parchment in a silent monastery. Perhaps you'll smell the warm bread of a village kitchen, or feel the cool air of midnight on a city wall. Each fact will be a doorway, carrying you deeper into the calm of the Middle Ages, and deeper into rest. So find your coziest spot, take a slow, deep breath, and let yourself drift away from today's worries. Because tonight, history isn't just to be learned, it's to be dreamed. Long before the glow of electricity and the endless hum of screens, the rhythm of sleep itself was different. Medieval people lived in a world guided by the sun, the moon, and the flicker of candlelight. And in that world, night was not a single stretch of slumber, but two. This pattern was called the first sleep and the second sleep. Imagine this. As dusk settled and candles were lit, families would eat their evening meal, say their prayers, and then, quite naturally, drift into the first part of their night's rest. This first sleep often lasted 3 or 4 hours. Then, in the heart of the night, sometime around midnight, or a little after, they would wake. But this waking wasn't restless. It wasn't a problem to be solved. It was simply part of life. For an hour, sometimes two, people would stir in the quiet of the dark. They might whisper to one another, tend the fire, or even step outside to see the stars stretching endlessly above. Think of a peasant family in their thatched cottage. The fire is low, but glowing. The air is cold, but still. The father might rise to check on the animals in the barn, ensuring no fox had come for the chickens. The mother might nurse a child or knead dough for the bread that would bake at dawn. The children might lie awake listening to the distant call of an owl. It was a natural rhythm, a pause between sleeps, as ordinary as the setting of the sun. And after this gentle interlude, they would return to bed. The second sleep would carry them until dawn, deeper and often dream-filled. Many believed that the dreams of this second sleep were especially vivid, because the body had already been refreshed once, and the mind was freer to wander. In fact, some medieval texts suggest that this midnight waking was seen as an ideal time for prayer, contemplation, or even for quiet intimacy between husband and wife. Picture a monastery, silent but alive with the rhythm of faith. Monks, bound to their hours, would rise at midnight to chant their prayers in the darkness. The flicker of oil lamps on stone walls, the soft shuffle of sandals, the low echo of voices weaving Latin hymns through empty corridors. For them, this wasn't just a break in sleep, it was a holy duty, a connection between earth and heaven in the stillest hours of the night. Meanwhile, in a castle chamber, a knight might wake from his first sleep and wander the halls, armor put aside, wrapped in a thick woolen cloak. He might stop at the chapel to kneel before a candlelit altar, or pace by the high windows, gazing out across his darkened lands. Perhaps he would join his companions in hushed conversation, trading stories while the world outside lay frozen in silence. Even in towns, the streets weren't always dead. In some places, bakers used these hours to light their ovens, filling the narrow lanes with the smell of warm bread long before dawn. For neighbors lying awake between sleeps, that drifting scent was a comfort, a reminder that life continued even in the blackest hours. And there was superstition too. Some believed the midnight waking was a threshold, a time when the veil between worlds was thin, Ghost stories, whispered by hearthlight, told of spirits walking them, of omens revealed in dreams during the second sleep. A farmer might step outside, look to the stars and murmur a quiet prayer, hoping to keep misfortune away before returning to bed. What's remarkable is that this two-part sleep wasn't rare at all. References appear in diaries, letters, and even court documents across Europe. The historian Roger Ekirch uncovered hundreds of mentions: peasants in France, merchants in England, monks in Italy, all describing this same rhythm, this first sleep and second sleep. It wasn't until the coming of industrialization and later electric light that this pattern began to fade. Artificial light stretched evenings longer, squeezed mornings tighter, and taught us to expect one long, unbroken night of rest. But in the medieval world, the natural ebb and flow of darkness allowed sleep to breathe, to come and go in two halves. Imagine for a moment adopting that rhythm yourself, falling asleep early, waking in the stillness of midnight, not to check your phone, but simply to exist, to watch the shadows move across your room, to sit quietly with your thoughts, to step outside and let the night sky pour over you, then to return to bed and sink into a second deeper slumber. It is a rhythm that feels almost alien to us now, yet deeply human, woven into centuries of lives before ours. So as you lie here listening, think of those countless souls across the ages. The peasant with straw in his hair, the monk with ink on his fingers, the knight with candle wax on his hands, all of them waking in the dark, sharing that secret hour between sleeps, and then, like you, surrendering once again to the quiet pull of dreams. Because even history itself, like the night, comes in rhythms, and in the Middle Ages, the rhythm of sleep was twofold, gentle, and endlessly human. In stories, we often picture castles as still, hushed giant stone walls sleeping under the moon, halls echoing with nothing but silence. But in truth, medieval castles were never truly quiet. Their stones held life, and even in the middle of the night, sound was everywhere. Imagine yourself in the great hall of a castle, long after the feast has ended. The torches have burned low, leaving shadows flickering across the beams. Yet the scent of roasted meat still lingers in the air. The fire in the hearth crackles softly, but above it faint snores echo from servants curled on straw pallets near the embers. Mice scurry in the rushes spread across the floor, nibbling at crumbs left behind. The hall isn't empty. It breathes with the remnants of the day. Step outside into the courtyard, the clink of a chain from the stables, where a restless horse stamps against the straw. A guard shifts in his armor, adjusting his spear against the cold night. Somewhere high on the battlements, another guard coughs quietly into the wind. These weren't polished knights of storybooks, but weary men, pacing stone walls, stamping their feet to keep warm, muttering prayers that the night would pass without alarm. Castles were filled with animals too. Dogs padded through corridors, sniffing for scraps or curling by their masters' doors. Geese and chickens might stir in wooden coops, and the distant bleat of sheep or the bray of a donkey drifted faintly from beyond the walls. These weren't just fortresses. They were homes, villages wrapped in stone. Life went on inside them at every hour. Now picture the kitchens. Even at night, work rarely ceased. Fires had to be kept smoldering, bread had to rise, and servants crept about preparing for the morning's meals. You might hear the muffled thud of a kneading board, the soft chatter of maids, the splash of water poured into heavy iron pots. And in noble households, midnight feasts were not unheard of. A knight returned late from hunting, a lord restless from dreams, calling for spiced wine or meat to be brought to him under candlelight. Move upward, into the chambers of the lords and ladies. Here, too, the quiet was filled. The creak of a wooden bed, the rustle of linen sheets, whispers shared in the dark. Children cried out from dreams, their voices muffled as a nursemaid rocked them gently back to sleep. In noble chambers, guards kept vigil at the door, shifting their weight, murmuring softly to one another to keep alert. And outside the walls, the castle did not sleep either. Wind groaned through arrow slits, rattling shutters. The drawbridge chains clinked with every sway of the wind. Sometimes wolves howled from distant forests, answered by barking dogs inside the courtyard. The castle was never silent. It was a chorus of stone, wood, animal, and human breath woven into the fabric of night. There was also the sound of water. Many castles had wells or cisterns, and the drip, drip, drip of water into stone echoed endlessly in the dark. Servants fetching water late at night would lower their buckets carefully, yet still the splash carried far into sleeping corridors. Even the smallest axe made sound that traveled. Now picture a storm rolling in, thunder rumbling over thick walls, rain beating against slate roofs and wooden shutters. In such moments, the castle became alive with noise. Children crying, dogs barking, guards tightening their cloaks, servants rushing to secure food stores from damp. Every room seemed to rattle and whisper with the force of nature pressing in. And yet, amid the clamor, there was comfort. These sounds were the heartbeat of safety. A villager sleeping in a thatched hut might hear wolves prowling outside or bandits creeping near. But inside a castle, the layers of life, the guards, the animals, the fires, the constant motion created a cocoon. The noise was not threatening, it was reassuring. It meant you were not alone. Think also of celebrations. If a wedding or a feast had filled the hall, the laughter, music, and stomping dances often stretched late into the night, echoing through every tower. Even long after the revelry had ended, echoes lingered, a minstrel strumming a final chord, a servant sweeping up bones and cups, a lone drunkard singing to himself as he stumbled to his bed. Castles were alive with memory, and those memories hummed in their stones. Even in the stillest hour, past midnight, silence never truly reigned. The human ear could always catch something, the sigh of a draft, the creak of beams, the flutter of bats nesting in towers. It was a living structure, never sleeping, always murmuring its existence. So as you lie here tonight, imagine yourself resting within those walls. Hear the faint rustle of straw beneath your blanket, the low hum of voices beyond your chamber, the clank of a guard's step on the wall above. Feel the comfort of life around you, the noise not as intrusion, but as company. Castles were never silent. They were alive, pulsing with the rhythms of medieval night. And within their walls, countless souls, just like you, found their rest. When we picture a knight, we imagine shining steel, heavy plate armor glinting in the sun, swords flashing, shields crashing. Yet the reality was softer, quieter, and far more layered than the stories tell. Beneath the clank of metal was a hidden world of cloth, leather, and choicest secrets of armor that made knights more human, more practical, and sometimes even more vulnerable than we imagine. First, consider the base layer. Long before a knight strapped on steel, he dressed in linen. A simple shirt, light and soft against the skin, protected him from the rub of heavier fabrics. Over that came the gambeson, a thick quilted jacket, stitched with layers of wool, linen, or even horsehair. This was not decoration. It was the true protector, absorbing the shock of blows, cushioning the body from bruises and broken bones. Some gambesons were so sturdy they could stand upright on their own, stiff with stitching, yet flexible enough to bend with the knight's body. When knights fought in smaller skirmishes, or when the heat of summer pressed down, they often chose this padded armor alone. Chainmail and plate were burdensome, weighing anywhere from 40 to 60 pounds. But a gambeson, light and padded, gave both protection and freedom of movement. So while the stories tell of endless metal, many knights and men-at-arms rode into battle in what looked, at a distance, like nothing more than a thickly stitched coat. Chainmail. Thousands of tiny iron rings linked together was another layer, but even this wasn't always worn as the movies suggest. Mail shirts called hauberks were expensive and took months to craft. Not every knight could afford a full suit. Some wore only mail sleeves or a mail coif to protect the head, while others patched together second-hand pieces bought from markets or inherited from fathers and uncles. Behind the glamour of chivalry, armor was often mismatched, dented, reused, a practical reality hidden beneath the polished myths. And then came the plate. By the late Middle Ages, knights were covered in steel. Yet this too held secrets. Plate was crafted with surprising delicacy. The joints were riveted in such a way that a knight could mount a horse, kneel to pray, or even dance if he wished. Artisans curved the breastplates to deflect blows, polished the surfaces to a mirror sheen, and lined the insides with leather straps. But not every knight owned such a suit. Some borrowed armor from their lords, others purchased only a breastplate or helmet to give the appearance of wealth, while leaving arms and legs less protected. Imagine for a moment the noise. We think of clattering metal, but well-made armor was quieter than you'd expect. Leather bindings softened the rattle. Padding muffled the clangs. A knight walking through a castle might sound more like a man with creaking boots than a clanking machine. The myth of constant noise is just that, a myth. The best armor moved with the body, whispering rather than shouting. There were also secrets in weight distribution. People today imagine armor so heavy that knights had to be lifted onto horses by cranes. Yet this is false. The weight, though significant, was balanced across the body. A trained knight could run, climb ladders, even vault onto his horse unaided. True, it was exhausting to wear for hours under the sun, but the stories of immobile, lumbering men of steel are exaggerations. In truth, a knight's training made the armor an extension of his body. But armor had vulnerabilities. Chainmail, for all its flexibility, could be pierced by an arrow at close range, or a thrusting sword aimed precisely between the rings. Plate, for all its brilliance, had weak points at the joints, the armpits, the groin, the visor slit of the helmet. Skilled opponents knew to aim there, sliding blades into gaps where steel gave way to flesh. Beneath the strength of armor lived the fragility of humanity. And there were social secrets too. Armor was a symbol of wealth. To stride in polished steel was not only to fight, but to display status. A knight in fine armor gleamed like a moving statue of power. But many, especially poor knights and squires, could not afford such grandeur. They patched their gambesons, wore dented helmets, carried shields scarred from years of blows. The shining knight of poetry was often a patchwork warrior in reality. In the quiet hours of a castle, imagine a knight preparing for the day. He does not don armor in a rush. Servants help him, first the linen, then the padded gambeson, the tug of chainmail over his head, the fastening of greaves at his legs, the pull of a cuirass over his chest. Buckles tightened, straps pulled, helmet lowered with a dull thud. It was a ritual, slow and deliberate, each layer telling a story of care, of defense, of vulnerability hidden beneath ritual. And when the day was done, when battle was over and the armor unbuckled, the knight remained sore and weary, sweat-soaked and bruised, his padded coat heavy with moisture, his body aching from every blow absorbed. Beneath the image of steel lay a man of flesh and bone, tired and human, like any of us. So as you rest tonight, think not of clanking statues marching across battlefields, but of real men adjusting straps in the dark, feeling the weight settle on their shoulders, whispering a prayer before dawn. Beneath every shining suit of armor lay secrets of cloth, leather, and human endurance hidden, fragile, and endlessly real. When we think of medieval feasts, we imagine long wooden tables, goblets of wine, and platters piled high with roasted meats. But one of the most curious details of those meals is that the plate, the very thing food was served on, was often not wood or metal or ceramic. It was bread. These bread plates were called trenchers. Picture a thick round slice of bread, cut from a coarse loaf, sometimes several days old. It wasn't soft, fluffy bread like we know today. It was dense, heavy, sturdy enough to hold hot stews or greasy meat. The trenchers sat on the table before each guest, and onto them the servants ladled portions of meat, vegetables, and sauces. Now imagine the sound of the hall as a feast began, the thud of trenchers being set down, one, by servants hurrying along the rows of benches. The smell of roasted venison or spiced chicken mingling with the sour tang of ale. The laughter of guests as they reach for knives, slicing meat and letting its juices soak deep into the bread below. Every bite was part of a rhythm, food sinking into food. the trencher growing heavy with flavor. The poorest guests ate their trenchers after the meal, enjoying bread softened by gravy. But the wealthy often left them behind, not because they were wasteful, but because these soaked loaves were gathered up and given to the poor, or to servants, or even fed to animals. Bread was life in the Middle Ages, and even when it wasn't eaten fresh, it had its purpose. Picture a castle banquet, nobles at the high table, trenchers stacked with roasted goose and glazed pork, sauce dripping into the crust. At the far end, squires and servants sit with their own trenchers, less meat, more broth, but the bread doing the same work, holding, soaking, feeding. Afterward, baskets are filled with leftovers in trenchers, carried down into the town, where the hungry wait by the gates. In this way, the plate itself became part of charity. And trenchers weren't always discarded. In humbler homes, they were eaten whole. A family of peasants, seated around their wooden table, might share a single loaf cut into 4 thick trenchers. Onto each went cabbage soup, maybe a scrap of salted pork, or beans simmered with herbs. As they ate, the bread grew softer, richer, and by the end of the meal, nothing was left but full bellies. The plate was gone because the plate was food. Over time, trenchers even inspired games and customs. Some households carved patterns into their bread to mark whose trencher was whose. In others, trenchers were flavored with herbs, turning the plate itself into a part of the dish. Guests might even swap trenchers, tasting the mingled flavors of another's meal. Now think of the texture. The bread was coarse, baked from barley, rye, or wheat, often mixed with whatever grain was available. It wasn't soft like modern bread. It was firm, almost tough, the kind of bread that could last for days without crumbling. Bakers designed it that way, knowing it would double as a dish. To hold hot gravy, bread had to be durable. Imagine yourself at one of those feasts. You sit on a bench in a long hall, torches flickering on stone walls. Before you lies a trencher of bread, heavy and solid. A servant ladles thick stew onto it, chunks of carrot, onion, and beef sliding across the crust. As you eat, you tear at the edges, dipping pieces into the sauce. The bread changes, growing soft, flavorful, more delicious with each bite. By the end, you've not only eaten your meal, you've eaten your plate. There was something practical and poetic in this. In a world where nothing could be wasted, the idea of bread as plate was natural. Why wash dishes when the dish itself could be eaten? Why spend coin on metalware when a loaf would do the work? And in a time when hunger lingered at the edges of every village, the act of passing down trenchers to the poor ensured that no crumb went unused. Even today, we carry traces of that tradition. Think of bread bowls filled with soup, crusty loaves hollowed out to hold chowder or stew. The modern version of the medieval trencher still lingers. A memory of a time when bread was more than food. It was the foundation of every meal, the vessel, the sustenance, the gift. So as you drift tonight, picture yourself at a long oak table, the air warm with firelight and laughter, a trencher before you. Hear the crack of crust under knife, the splash of gravy soaking into grain, the low murmur of voices all around. And as you take a slow, imagined bite, feel how even the simplest thing, a piece of bread, held the weight of an entire world. The Middle Ages remind us that food was not just nourishment. It was practical, spiritual, communal. Even the plate was something to be shared, softened, and savored. And in the quiet of that truth, we find a rhythm as simple and timeless as bread itself. When we picture the Middle Ages, many imagine dirt, filth, and people who never bathed. But the truth is far more surprising. Before the Black Death, public bathhouses were common, loved, and woven into daily life. Far from being a world of endless grime, the medieval bathhouse was a place of warmth, of water, and of community. Imagine walking through the narrow streets of a medieval town. The air smells of bread from the baker, smoke from the blacksmith's forge, and then something different, the rich, damp scent of steam rising into the air. You follow it to a building marked by a sign of a steaming tub or a bucket of water. This is the bathhouse. Inside, warmth greets you. A fire crackles under great copper cauldrons, heating water that is poured into wooden tubs. Steam clings to the air, softening the cold of stone walls. People laugh, chatter, and relax in the glow. For a few pennies, anyone could step inside, rich or poor, and wash away the dust of the world. Men and women sometimes bathed together, though often at different times of the day. A merchant might come at noon, weary from the market, washing away the sweat of trade. A group of peasants might visit after work in the fields, scrubbing dirt from their arms. Nobles, too, loved their baths, some building private bathhouses within their manors, filling tubs with rose petals, herbs, or even warm wine to soften the skin. Picture the tubs themselves. They were large, round, and wooden, bound with iron bands. Into them was poured steaming water, ladled from the cauldrons. Herbs floated on the surface, sage for cleansing, lavender for calming, chamomile for softening. Some baths smelled of rosemary or mint, their fragrance clinging to the skin long after the water cooled. There was food and drink as well. A bather might sip warm spiced wine while soaking, or nibble on sweet cakes. For many, the bathhouse was as much about leisure as cleanliness. Imagine the hum of voices, the laughter echoing from wooden walls, the clink of cups and the soft splash of water. In towns like Paris or London, bathhouses became social hubs. Friends met there to talk, merchants discussed deals, lovers shared quiet moments. Some bathhouses even had small private rooms draped with cloth, where bathers could recline after soaking, warmed by blankets and firelight. For a moment, life felt softer, more luxurious, even for those who lived their days in toil. Children, too, were brought to bathhouses, splashing in the shallow tubs, their laughter rising above the deeper tones of adults. For many, it was a rare chance to be warm, clean, and carefree. But not all trusted them. Preachers sometimes warned that bathhouses encouraged sin, pointing to the mingling of men and women, or to the luxuries of food and drink enjoyed there. Yet despite sermons, people kept going. The lure of warmth and water was too strong, especially in the long winters of Europe. Then came the plague. The Black Death swept through in the mid-14th century, and with it came fear. Many believed that bathing opened the pores, making the body vulnerable to disease. What had once been a place of health became seen as a place of danger. Slowly, bathhouses closed, fires went out in the cauldrons, tubs sat empty, gathering dust, and the rhythm of communal bathing, so natural for centuries, faded into memory. But before that shadow, for hundreds of years, the bathhouse was part of life. Think of a peasant stepping into warm water after a week in the fields, sighing as the heat eased sore muscles. Think of a noble reclining in perfumed water, servants pouring more warmth into the tub. Think of friends laughing together, steam curling through the air. The night outside cold but forgotten. Even today, echoes remain. The hot springs of Hungary, the public baths of Japan, the hammams of the Middle East, all remind us that water, warmth, and community are timeless comforts. The medieval bathhouse was no different, a place of cleansing, healing, and connection. So as you rest tonight, picture yourself stepping into one of those wooden tubs. Feel the heat of the water wrapping your body, the scent of lavender rising with the steam. Hear the soft splash as you sink deeper, the low hum of voices around you. Outside, the medieval town sleeps under stars, but here, in the bathhouse, time slows. The world may have changed, the plague may have silenced the fires, but the memory remains. Before the darkness came, the people of the Middle Ages cherished the bath, not as a rare act, but as a rhythm of life, a warmth in the cold, a cleansing in the dust, a gentle reminder that even in a world of hardship, there was room for comfort. In the Middle Ages, the boundary between human and animal was not always as firm as we think today. People lived side by side with their animals, pigs wandering through village lanes, oxen pulling carts, cats curling near the hearth, dogs trotting beside their masters. Animals were not just companions or food, they were part of daily life, woven into the fabric of society. And because they were so entwined, when animals misbehaved, when they destroyed crops, or caused injury, or even killed medieval people, sometimes believed they should be treated like humans, brought to trial, judged before law. Imagine for a moment A small medieval village. The church bells toll. The villagers gather, murmuring to one another. Curiosity thick in the air. At the center of attention is not a thief or a murderer, but a pig. Its snout twitching, eyes blinking nervously, ropes tied around its body as it is led into the square. This pig has been accused perhaps of trampling a child or eating grain that did not belong to it. And now, in the eyes of the law, it must stand trial. These trials were not symbolic gestures. They were carried out with real seriousness. A judge presided. Witnesses were called. Evidence was presented. In some cases, lawyers were even appointed to defend the accused animal, arguing on its behalf as though it were a person. Records survive of pigs, goats, dogs, and even insects being charged with crimes. Picture a dusty courtroom in rural France. The judge sits high on his chair, robes gathered around him. To his left, clerks scratch notes onto parchment. Before him, a tethered pig shifts restlessly, snorting. Onlookers whisper and laugh nervously, yet the proceedings move forward with solemnity. The prosecution argues that the pig acted with violence. The defense suggests negligence of the owners, or that the animal could not be held fully accountable. Sometimes the verdict was harsh. Animals were sentenced to punishment, even execution. Chronicles tell of pigs hanged in the gallows, dressed in clothes to mark their crime. To us, it feels strange, absurd, even cruel. But to the medieval mind, justice was about order. If a life was lost, some penalty had to be seen, even if the guilty party was not human. And not only domestic animals, there were trials of insects too. Locusts, rats, or weevils, accused of destroying crops, were summoned before courts. Priests might be called to exorcise them, or even to order them to leave fields under threat of curses. Imagine the solemnity of such a ritual. A bishop standing in a field, robes fluttering in the wind, declaring to the insects that they must depart in the name of God, while farmers waited anxiously for the crops to be spared. To medieval people, this was not folly. It was faith. The world was bound together under divine order, and every creature had its place. When that order was broken, whether by man or beast, it had to be addressed. The court was the stage where such balance was sought. Picture a village child watching as a goat is brought forward, accused of butting down a fence and ruining a garden. The child does not laugh because to them, this is real. They whisper to their mother, asking what will happen, and she hushes them, eyes fixed on the judge. To the community, the trial is both spectacle and justice, reminding them that no one, not even an animal, is beyond law. And yet there was compassion too. In some cases, animals were spared. Records show pigs acquitted when blame was shared with careless owners, or when witnesses could not agree on the crime. Sometimes the punishment was lighter banishment from the village, or a symbolic act of penance. The practice began to fade as centuries passed, as legal thought grew more modern, and as the Enlightenment reshaped ideas of justice. But for hundreds of years, these trials were part of medieval life, a window into a world where faith, law, and imagination intertwined. So as you rest tonight, picture one of those trials. The murmur of villagers gathered in a square, the solemn judge in his robes, the strange sight of an animal standing accused. The air is heavy with curiosity, the crowd shifting on their feet, the animal snorting softly. A sentence is passed, a record written in ink, another layer of history added to parchment. It is strange to us, but to them it was order. And in the echo of that strangeness, we glimpse how different the Middle Ages truly were, a time when law embraced not only men, but beasts, and the world itself was alive with meaning. Today we think of books as ordinary. They sit on our shelves in neat rows, printed by machines in seconds, bought cheaply, carried easily. But in the Middle Ages, a book was not ordinary at all. It was treasure. It was labor. It was devotion. And sometimes it took years, even decades, to bring a single book into being. Imagine yourself stepping into a medieval scriptorium, the writing room of a monastery. The air is cool, the walls thick, muffling sound. Rows of desks stretch along narrow windows, each desk lit only by the pale glow of daylight streaming in. At each desk sits a monk, quill in hand, bent low over parchment. The silence is broken only by the scratch of quills and the soft shuffle of robes. The parchment itself was precious. Not paper, but animal skin, calf, sheep, or goat, carefully scraped, stretched, and smoothed until it gleamed pale and thin. A single large book might require the skins of dozens, even hundreds of animals. Before a word was written, the cost was immense. Now picture the process. A monk dips his quill into ink made from oak galls, soot, or crushed minerals. Slowly, carefully, he writes letter by letter, line by line. His hand must remain steady, his breathing calm, for one slip could mar a page that had taken days to prepare. Hours pass, yet only a few lines are complete. Day after day, the work continues, each page a meditation, each word an offering. Some books were simple, Bibles, psalters, collections of prayers, but others were elaborate, adorned with gold leaf and bright pigments. In illuminated manuscripts, letters bloomed into flowers, margins curled into vines and beasts, saints' robes shimmered with powdered lapis lazuli, a stone so rare it was brought from distant Afghanistan. The work of illumination could double or triple the time it took to finish a book. Picture a team of monks, each with a role. One copies the text, another corrects errors, comparing it to the master copy. An illuminator adds images, tiny saints with expressive faces, dragons curling through margins, or intricate patterns of leaves and stars. A binder gathers finished pages, sewing them together, pressing them between wooden boards wrapped in leather. By the time the book is complete, years may have passed. And in the end, the result was more than parchment and ink. It was a sacred object. Books were chained to lecterns so they could not be stolen. Nobles stored them in chests as family treasures. Universities prized them as the lifeblood of learning. To own a book was to hold a piece of eternity, a fragment of the divine. Now imagine being one of those monks. It is winter, and the scriptorium is cold. Your breath fogs the air as you lean over your page. Candlelight flickers, casting shadows across the ink. Hours pass in silence. Your hand aches, your eyes blur, yet you continue. Every letter is a prayer, every line a step closer to God. In this work, patience is devotion. Or picture a wealthy noblewoman commissioning a book of hours, a private prayer book to guide her through the day. Artists labor for years to complete it, each page a jewel of color and light. When she finally receives it, she cradles it like a child, its pages glowing with gold, its prayers meant to guide her soul. This single book may outlive her, pass to her children, her grandchildren, carried through generations as a symbol of devotion and wealth. There were secular books, too. Romances, histories, medical texts. But even these took years. To read a story of King Arthur or a treatise on herbs was to hold something born of endless patience. Every tale, every diagram was written by human hand, with love, with effort, with time. And yet, errors crept in. Imagine copying by candlelight for hours on end. A weary monk might skip a line or repeat one. Some left little jokes in the margins, drawings of snails fighting knights, or cats chasing mice across the parchment. In these moments, we glimpse their humanity, weary, playful, alive. The arrival of the printing press in the 15th century changed everything. Suddenly, books could be made in weeks, not years. But before that moment, for centuries, every book was a masterpiece of patience. Every page carried the weight of years, of hands that had touched it, of eyes that had wept over it. So as you drift tonight, imagine yourself in that scriptorium. Hear the scratching of quills, the sigh of monks shifting in their seats, the faint creak of wooden desks. Smell the ink, sharp and earthy. Feel the texture of parchment, smooth yet alive with the memory of the animal it once was. The work is slow, almost endless. Yet in that slowness lies beauty. A book is not simply made, it is born. And in the Middle Ages, each one carried within it not just words, but years of life, patience, and prayer. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, think of those monks, their candles burning low, their hands steady even as the hours stretch long. Their devotion flows across centuries, landing softly in your dreams. For even now, the books they labored over still whisper patience, endurance, eternity. When you picture medieval life, you might imagine people gathering around wells, drawing cool water in wooden buckets. But the truth is, in much of medieval Europe, water wasn't trusted. Wells could be foul, rivers carried waste, and streams ran with mud after rain. To drink water was often to gamble with sickness. Instead, people turned to something else ale. Not the strong ale we think of today, but a mild, everyday brew, weaker in alcohol and safer than water. In villages, towns, and even monasteries, ale was the drink of life. From children to nobles, peasants to priests, everyone drank it. Picture a medieval village in the morning. The sun is rising, roosters crow, smoke curls from thatched roofs. Inside a cottage, a woman stirs a pot over the fire, brewing the day's ale. Barley bubbles in water, yeast gives life to the liquid, and soon the air is filled with a warm, malty smell. This was a small ale, light, nourishing, barely alcoholic, safe to drink for the whole family. Children sipped it with breakfast, men carried it to the fields, women drank it as they spun wool or baked bread. It was not a luxury, it was survival. The secret lay in the brewing. When ale was made, the water was boiled, killing harmful germs. Fermentation added acidity and a touch of alcohol, both acting as further safeguards. Where water could make you ill, ale could quench your thirst without fear. And so, mugs of ale stood on nearly every medieval table, morning to night. Now imagine a monastery. In long stone halls, monks brewed with discipline, refining recipes that would echo through centuries. Great cauldrons steamed, hops were added for flavor, barrels lined cellars. Monks drank ale at meals, not as indulgence but as health. For them, moderation was devotion, but even in devotion, ale had its place. In towns, alehouses bustled with life. Picture a wooden room, smoky with hearth fire, benches crowded with laborers at day's end. Tankards clink together as men trade stories, merchants strike deals, laughter rises into the rafters. Outside, the streets are dark, but inside the alehouse glows with warmth, comfort, and noise. And yet ale was not all the same. There was the light, everyday small ale for the family, and stronger brews for feasts or winter nights. Nobles often drank imported wines, but even they trusted ale daily. For peasants, it was not just drink, but food thick, nourishing, rich in calories. A field worker might drink several quarts in a day, not to grow drunk, but to keep strong. There was also craft in brewing. Recipes varied from village to village. Some added herbs like rosemary, yarrow, or juniper. Some brewed darker, richer ales. Others light and quick to drink. In households, women were often the brewers, known as alewives, their skills passing from mother to daughter. A good brew was prized, a bad one scorned, and in markets, ale was tested for quality, with strict punishments for those who cheated. Imagine a feast in a castle hall. Silver goblets gleam with wine for the lords and ladies. But down the benches, servants and squires lift mugs of ale. The smell of roasted meat mingles with the yeasty scent of drink. Jugs are carried in by servants, foaming at the top, poured into waiting cups. The sound of laughter, the splash of ale spilling, the rhythmic pounding of cups on wood. This was the heartbeat of celebration. And think of the children. Strange as it may sound to us, they too drank ale daily. Not strong brews, but the small ale of home. In a world without clean water, it was safer, and it filled bellies. To grow up in the Middle Ages was to grow up with the taste of barley and yeast always on your tongue. There were superstitions too. Some believed ale gave strength against illness, others that it warmed the soul against cold winds. Songs were sung about it, prayers whispered before drinking. Tavern signs painted with tankards and hops. Ale was not just drink, it was woven into culture, into ritual, into memory. Of course there were excesses. Some drank too much of the stronger ale, staggering through streets, mocked in poems and sermons. But the everyday truth was simpler. Ale was not about drunkenness. It was about safety, nourishment, and life. So as you drift tonight, picture yourself in a medieval alehouse. The wooden table before you is scarred by years of use. A clay mug rests in your hand. warm with the weight of drink. Around you, voices murmur, fire crackles, laughter rises. The taste is earthy, soft, not sharp like modern beer, but comforting, nourishing. Outside, the night is cold, the well water uncertain, but here, within stone walls, ale is safety. Ale is warmth. Ale is life. And so the Middle Ages remind us, even in hardship, people found ways to endure. Where water could not be trusted, they brewed trust into every cup, raising their mugs not in luxury, but in survival. In the Middle Ages, medicine was not only about herbs, prayers, or surgery. It was about the heavens, the stars above, the slow sweep of the moon, the wandering of the planets. All of these were thought to shape the body, the mind, and even the very blood that flowed through veins. To heal a person, one had to look not just at the wound or the fever, but at the sky. Picture a sick villager lying on a straw bed, his family anxious around him. A physician arrives, carrying not only bags of herbs and instruments, but also a book of charts. Before lifting a hand to treat, he steps outside, gazes at the stars, and consults his tables. Was the moon waxing or waning? Was Mars rising in the east? These signs were as important to him as the pulse beneath the patient's wrist. This belief was rooted in the ancient idea of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Each humor was tied to elements, seasons, and even planets. A patient's imbalance might be blamed on Saturn's heaviness, or Mars's fiery influence, or the cooling shadow of the moon. To know how to heal, the doctor had to read the cosmos. Now imagine a medieval university classroom in Paris. Students gather around a master as he unrolls a parchment painted with stars, signs of the zodiac circling its edge. He explains how Aries governs the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms, and so forth down the body. To heal a toothache, one must look to Aries. To treat a stomach ailment, consider Virgo. The stars map the human body as much as they map the heavens. And there were rules. Bloodletting, a common practice, was often timed according to the moon. A doctor might refuse to bleed a patient if the moon lay in the wrong sign, fearing the act would do more harm than good. Operations, too, were guided by astrology. Surgeons delayed cutting into flesh if the heavens warned against it. Even childbirth was thought safer under certain constellations, and midwives whispered prayers not only to saints but to the stars. Picture a nobleman in his chamber, fevered and weak. His physician kneels by the bed listening, then consults his chart. The stars suggest imbalance of heat. The doctor prescribes cool herbs, perhaps violets steeped in water, or a draught of milk mixed with rosé. He marks the date and hour carefully, noting which planets ruled that moment, for these details shape the course of recovery. And think of the farmers, watching the skies as much for healing as for planting. They believed that the same forces that turned the seasons also guided the body. The position of the stars could mean when best to sow seeds, when best to gather herbs, when best to treat a cough. The world was one tapestry, earth and sky woven together. There were skeptics, of course. Some clerics warned against trusting too deeply in astrology, fearing it drew too near to forbidden arts. Yet even they admitted that the stars, as part of God's creation, surely had influence. To many, the heavens were a vast clock, set in motion by the Creator, and doctors merely learned to read its ticking. Imagine a physician's desk. Candles burn low, charts and manuscripts spread wide. He traces lines across a star map, marking conjunctions, eclipses, planetary movements. Outside, the town sleeps, but he is awake, measuring the fate of bodies in the wheel of the heavens. To him, this is not superstition, but science, as real as any herb gathered from a meadow. And sometimes patients believed as strongly as doctors. A villager might refuse treatment if the stars warned against it. A mother might wait for a favorable sign before letting her child be bled or dosed with herbs. The faith in the heavens shaped choices, rhythms, lives. As centuries passed, astrology's grip on medicine began to fade. New discoveries of anatomy, circulation, and disease replaced the old charts. Yet for hundreds of years, the night sky was a healer's guide. The stars were not only distant lights, they were silent physicians, whispering advice through their positions and patterns. So as you drift tonight, picture yourself beneath that medieval sky. The world around you is dark, but above, the stars glitter like silver dust. A physician tilts his head upward, reading their messages, believing that in their slow dance lay the secrets of life and death. The air is cool, the night quiet, the stars eternal. And in that stillness, you feel it too, the pull of the heavens, the sense that we are small, yet connected. That perhaps, just perhaps, the stars do speak. And the Middle Ages remind us that to heal was not only to look within, but also to look above. When you walk into a medieval cathedral today, it feels timeless. Stone arches soar above, stained glass glows with 1,000 colors, and the air hums with silence and awe. But what we forget is that these vast works of stone did not rise in a single lifetime. They took generations, sometimes centuries, to complete. The men who laid the first stones often never saw the roof finished. The builders worked not for themselves, but for children and grandchildren yet unborn. Imagine a medieval town in the 12th century. A plot of land has been cleared, foundations dug, the bishop blesses the ground, the townsfolk gather, and the first stone is set. Bells ring, prayers rise, the people cheer. For them, this is the beginning of something that will outlive them all. A cathedral for God, for glory, for eternity. Day after day, masons chip away at blocks of limestone, their hammers echoing across the square. Carpenters shape scaffolding, ropes creak as pulleys lift stones higher and higher. The smell of fresh-cut wood mingles with dust, and the sun beats down as men labor. Yet progress is slow. Years pass and the walls rise only a little. Children grow up seeing the cathedral unfinished. A boy who once played at the construction site becomes a mason himself, working on the very walls he grew up beside. His son, too, will work there. By the time the great roof is set, 3, 4, or even 5 generations may have passed, each family leaving their mark on stone that will outlast them. Think of Notre Dame in Paris. Construction began in 1163 and continued for over a century, with towers, spires, and chapels added long after the original builders had turned to dust. Or Cologne Cathedral in Germany, begun in 1248, left unfinished for centuries and only completed in the 19th century. To medieval eyes, this was not failure. It was simply the rhythm of eternity. Cathedrals were never meant to be rushed. Inside, artisans worked as patiently as the masons outside. Stained glass makers cut tiny pieces of colored glass, fitting them into lead frames to tell stories of saints in scripture. The light they created was not just decoration, it was the light of heaven itself, pouring into stone through windows of fire and jewel. Carvers shaped angels, demons, and flowers into pillars. Painters adorned walls with frescoes, gilding halos with real gold leaf. Every detail was devotion, and the people waited. For decades, they prayed in wooden chapels or half-built naves, hearing mass under scaffolding, their voices echoing off unfinished walls. They knew they might never see the cathedral complete, yet they gave coin, labor, and faith. For them, the cathedral was a promise. Even if unfinished in their lifetime, it was built for God, who measured time differently. Imagine the sounds of construction, the steady rhythm of hammers, the rasp of chisels, the thud of stone lowered into place, voices calling out measurements, oxen pulling carts heavy with rock, children watching in awe as towers reached toward the sky. The town lived with this music for centuries, its identity bound to the slow rising of the cathedral. There was also struggle. Funding ran dry, wars interrupted work, plagues stole laborers. Sometimes work stopped for decades. Scaffolding rotted, weeds grew over unfinished foundations. Yet always in time, the work began again. New hands picked up old tools, new visions carried forward the dream. And when at last a cathedral stood complete, its bells rang across fields and forests, proclaiming not just triumph, but persistence. The walls bore the touch of countless hands, the prayers of generations, the patience of centuries. A farmer whose great-grandfather had laid stones could now kneel within finished walls. knowing the family's work had become part of something eternal. Even today, when you step into one of these cathedrals, you feel that weight of time. You walk among shadows carved by people who never saw their work completed. You stand beneath glass painted by men who died before the windows were ever set in place. You tread on stones worn smooth by centuries of feet. So as you rest tonight, imagine lying on a patch of grass near a half-built cathedral. Above you, scaffolding rises into the sky, workers shouting as they haul stones, hammers echoing into the distance. The smell of mortar, the dust of lime, the hum of voices. This is the heartbeat of a dream greater than any one lifetime. Close your eyes and now imagine returning centuries later. The scaffolding is gone. The towers stretch into the heavens. Bells toll across the town, their sound rolling over rooftops like thunder. The cathedral stands eternal, born of patience, faith, in countless hands. The lesson of those walls is simple. Some things take longer than a lifetime. Some dreams belong not to one, but to many. And in the Middle Ages, that patience carved stone into eternity. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let the cathedral rise around you. Hear the distant bells, feel the cool hush of stone, see the colors of glass glowing with morning light. Know that you are resting in the shadow of centuries where time itself became prayer, and every dream, no matter how long, found its way to the sky. And so, sleepyheads, our journey through the 10 forgotten facts of the Middle Ages comes to an end. We've wandered through the rhythm of two sleeps, drifted into the noisy life of castles at night, felt the weight of knight's armor, and even tasted trenchers of bread at a medieval feast. We've stepped into warm bathhouses, sat in strange courtrooms where animals were tried, and knelt in scriptoria where books took years to be born. We've raised mugs of ale, looked up at doctors who trusted the stars, and stood in awe before cathedrals that reached the heavens after centuries of patient labor. Each fact, each story, was not just history, it was a doorway, a way to imagine how life once flowed, how people once dreamed, how the world was alive with sounds, scents, and rhythms so different from ours, yet still so deeply human. And now, as the last candle of this journey flickers low, I want to thank you. Truly, thank you for spending your night here, in this space we've built together, dreaming through ages. Before you drift away completely, I'd love for you to share with me, where in the world are you listening tonight? And what time is it there? I always find it magical to see comments from every corner of the globe, night owls, early risers, dreamers, all joining together in this small corner of history and calm. If you've enjoyed this journey, remember to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and join our little community of sleepy historians. Every gesture of support helps keep these long, dreamy stories alive. But for now, you don't need to move. You don't need to think of anything at all. Just let go. Let the weight of the day slip away, like armor unbuckled, like candles burning down to wax. Let the quiet take you, as monks once did in their second sleep, as villagers once did after long days of toil. Because tonight, you are part of that same rhythm, resting, dreaming, letting the world fade into silence. So close your eyes, steady your breath, and drift. Dream of castles, of stars, of cathedrals that rise slowly into the heavens. Dream of warmth, of bread, of voices whispering in old stone halls. Dream through ages and let history carry you into peace. Until we meet again in the next story, sleep well, sleep deeply, and may your dreams be gentle.